Folks, welcome to the inaugural episode of the PlayAction Pod. I'm your host, Christian McCullum. We're going to have a lot of guests over the season for you here, but we're kicking it off with my main man, Jamie Uyeyama from Irish Sports Daily, my coworker at Irish Sports Daily. He is the Notre Dame expert. So when we're looking at Notre Dame picks this year, Jamie's going to be the guy we're going to lean on, and if he gets them wrong, he's going to be the guy we complain to. So
Jamie, I'm the guy to blame.
Exactly. So, I mean, obviously, Notre Dame had a great season last year. Didn't end the way Irish fans would have hoped, getting blown out in the playoff again. But just overall, general, some changes on offense. What is Notre Dame's outlook for the 2021 season?
Well, I think offensively, you're going to see something a little bit different, right? Where last year, everyone kind of knew that Notre Dame played heavy, right? And by heavy, I mean they played with a lot of tight ends on the field. They played a lot of 12 personnel. They played some 13. I think people over-exaggerate how many times that they played with 3 tight ends. Usually that was just like a short yardage thing. Occasionally they'd break it in, maybe, 3 or 4 plays a game in the regular offense. But for the most part, that was a short yardage thing. But they played with 12 a lot, right? And they didn't play with 3 receivers, 11 personnel, 1 back, 1 tight end. With 3 receivers, they didn't feel that confident in the receivers until maybe later in the year, right? And but I think if you look at, that's because that was the strength of the team, right? And where they were at with Tommy Tremble and what he offered as a very unique blocker, right? Like probably one of the best lead blockers, most vicious blockers, run blockers Notre Dame has had at tight end in a very long time. So. And Brock Wright obviously was a good inline option too. And a lot of times those were the 2 tight ends on the field. Well, they don't have those guys anymore. They still have a really good tight end room. And Michael Mayer obviously, has a chance to be a special player as a receiver, and was a really good receiver last year. But I think you're going to see Notre Dame's going to be a lot more spread out this year. They don't have, they lost 4 starters in the offensive line, 3 of the guys who went on day 2 in the NFL draft. So they lost some really good players. I think they're still talented up front, but I don't think they're going to be close to where they were, for most of last year. I think it's going to take time, right? So I think because of that, they can't rely on the running game as much. They're going to have to be a little bit more creative with what they do. But it's going to be important to get those backs in space, though, because Notre Dame still has some of the best backs in the country. When Kyron Williams is one of the top backs in the country, Chris Tyree, in any other year, if he was the guy who's going to be the starter, you'd predict him to be having a breakout season to be a star this year, right? And then Sibo Flemister is a guy who could start for a ton of Power 5 teams, and he's their 3rd back. And then Logan Diggs is a true freshman, made a ton of plays in camp, right? So they got 4 good backs, really. But really, they're going to rely a lot on Williams and Tyree. I think they're going to play more 21 with getting those guys more involved in the passing game. I think Kevin Austin being healthy, who Notre Dame fans all know is a guy who was projected to be a wide receiver 1 for a very long time. And now he's healthy. First time he's in his career that he's starting in game 1 of the regular season. And he kind of lived up to the hype in camp. I think he has a chance to have a really, really great year, be that top guy for them. And then combined with, mixing on some big plays. Obviously, Lawrence Keys is healthy right now. Braden Lindsey's healthy right now. They've got a couple of young guys in Lorenzo Styles Jr., Deion Colsey, who can do some things. And I think they're going to be a little bit more wide open. I think they're going to run a little bit more play action. They're going to try to make some more plays, more explosive plays in the passing game, not just deep balls. With Jack Cohn, and I think he can throw it a little bit better than Ian Book, but they also lose that element of Ian Book as a runner too. So they have to be different this year. And different, I think, is going to be, I don't want to say better. It's just different in a way that it'll be, they're going to, in order to be successful, they need to throw the ball better. They need to create big plays in the passing game more, because they aren't going to be able to grind it out. I don't see as many opportunities where they're just going to finish off 4th quarters with 4-minute offense like they did in probably like 5-6 games last year. I don't think that's going to be their style of offense. They're going to have to put up more points and do it while throwing the football.
Kevin Austin's the guy for me. If Notre Dame has a great season this year, Kevin Austin's going to be a household name. People across the country are going to say, holy smokes, who's this guy? Like you said, he's been there for a while. Just kind of circumstances have prevented him from getting on the field and producing. But if they have a big year, he's going to be a household name. All right, so the Irish kick off Sunday, prime time, Labor Day, ABC, against Florida State, only game of the day. All eyes on them. The number was like 9.5 at one point. It's down to 7.5. What do you think? Notre Dame by slightly more than a touchdown. Who you got?
Man, I like Notre Dame by 2 scores, easy in this game. One, I think because Florida State's just not that good. Like, for Irish Sports Daily, I have to spend a ton of time researching the opponents and, looking at it. And if you look at anyone, I'm not talking about just fans. I'm talking about people who objectively cover the team that aren't homers. And they'll tell you, Florida State is not good, and they're trying to 6-6 is what they're hoping to be, right? And Notre Dame, a little bit of a reloading situation with some of what they're doing on offense and defense. But if you compare the talent on Florida State to Notre Dame, there's just not a lot of dudes on Florida State that start for Notre Dame. They're just not, right? Like, especially on offense. For what they have, right? Like Jordan Travis is probably going to start a quarterback, and I think he's dynamic. He's got a chance to be a great runner, and apparently he's improved as a passer. But they're supposed to have the worst wide receiver group in the ACC. They don't have a lot of returning production coming back. They got a transfer from Kansas, Andrew Parchment, who they're really relying on. But I mean, he did nothing last year. His last big year was 2019. So you don't know what you're going to get with him. You hear he's got a little bit of a head case too. And they have some talent in the backfield. But again, up front, who do they have there? Who do they have? None of those guys would start for Notre Dame. And we're talking about Notre Dame has a rebuilding offensive line. Dylan Gibbons, was a serviceable guy, really hard, tough kid, really good road grading run blocker type. He wasn't going to start at Notre Dame. He's starting at Florida State, right? Like, he got beat out by Rocco Spindler in the spring, and, Rocco's not starting at Notre Dame right now, right? So I think when you look at it from that perspective, it's hard to see how they're going to put up a ton of points, unless Mike Norvell just he's just on fire as a play caller all game long. And then defensively, I think they have in the back end of the defense, they got talent, right? They signed a bunch of kids, that have talent, but all those guys a lot of them are young and inexperienced. So it's a little bit like, I would look at their back end of their defense and look at a little bit similar to Notre Dame in that they obviously have athletes, but they don't have a Kyle Hamilton All-American type right there with them. And then linebackers, I mean, they just don't have the linebackers. Like, a lot of those guys wouldn't start for a lot of ACC teams, let alone Notre Dame, right? And then up front, 2 transfers are starting at defensive end. They have decent guys inside. Jermaine Johnson was a good player for Georgia, didn't start for Georgia, but was a good player, is going to be a good pass rusher for them. But he's considered the best player on the team based on everything you hear from camp. And I mean, he didn't start at Georgia. Like, when would that ever happen at Florida State? Like, that's been a long time since it's been like that. So, Peter Bulwer's not walking through that door. Andre Wadsworth's not walking through that door. They don't have the same dudes that they usually do. So that's why when I look at it, there has to be a lot of things to go right for them to, for Notre Dame not to cover in this game, in my opinion, because it's got to be like a bunch of guys cramping up. They win the turnover battle. And then even then, I still see Notre Dame being good enough to win the game, and probably still, I mean that the half point, maybe I'd buy the half point if I was just, if I was a little worried about the weather or anything like that. But I was just in South Bend. I mean, it was Florida hot in South Bend, so they at least got a little bit of taste of that in terms of humidity and stuff. So, man, I just don't see Notre Dame winning or Not losing the game, definitely. So, I easy take the money line for Notre Dame if you want to throw it in a parlay or whatever. But, if you're looking at it from a perspective of they're going to cover that number, I'd feel pretty good about it.
And this is one thing I always think about with openers when it comes to whether you have a new coach or new OC or new quarterback or something. And maybe it's not so much of a worry with a number like 7.5, but the backdoor cover is like, they're going to let Jack Cohn and Kevin Austin get some reps. If they're up 14, they're going to still say, hey, let's get some work in here. So I don't know if that impacts your thoughts maybe on the over-under. It's 56 right now. What do you think about the over-under?
That's a good point, and I think that's probably the way that I'm leaning too, because I could see it kind of being a little tight and, early in the game, maybe even at half, right, where it's tight, it's a one-score game, maybe even tied at half. I could see that kind of thing happening where it's a 2019 Louisville type situation, right, where Brian Kelly brought it up in his press conference. But I totally agree with you because, Blake Fisher – they're not going to be, Blake, get out of the game. Like, even if they take guys out of the game, I imagine Blake Fisher's still going to play, So they're going to keep a lot of starters in because they need guys with reps. Like J.D. Bertrand, who's stepping in for Maris Liufu, that guy needs reps. Yeah, he hasn't played, right? So they're going to play a lot of those guys. And plus, with the depth they have on the defensive line, even if they were playing their threes at the end of the game, the threes could start on a lot of teams for Notre Dame on their defensive line. So they still have dudes, right? So from that perspective, like, I don't know about the total because I don't know how much points that Florida State's going to put on the board, right? And from that, I'd be wary of that. To me, it would be a stay away.
Okay. See, that's why we got Jamie here as the first guest. You hear that kind of, there's no wishy-washy stuff here and there. He's got Notre Dame minus 7.5, no doubt. Throw the money line in your parlays off platform if you want. Jamie, thanks a lot, man. Appreciate it. And as always, you got to go check him out at irishsportsdaily.com. He's going to break all this stuff down. He breaks it all down all week, every week. So thanks a lot, Jamie, and we'll see you later.
Thanks, Chris.